In today's game, we have 4 chess principles guaranteed to raise the quality of your chess play and make you a better player. We're going to look at them through a game of Wesley So, a game he played against Tomas Fodor. Wesley So was over 2,500 rated when this game was played, and he had the white pieces. His opponent had black. Wesley played e4, e6, d4, d5, knight c3, knight to f6. This is the main approach in the French defense. Black can play different ways. But then white plays e5. Wesley So takes the space in the middle of the board. And this is the first chess principle that I want to share with you, and that is always take whatever your opponent gives you. In this case, we can see black is letting Wesley So play e5 with tempo. Now, it's not the only move in the position, but it's a very strong move. So he plays e5, not only gaining space, but kicking that knight at f6 away from its control of the center. And in these types of positions, players will often give up space or even the advantage of the 2 bishops without even trying. So you take whatever your opponent gives you. Knight f to d7, f4, continuing to gain space, creating a traditional French structure where white will break with the f5 square, the f4, f5, and black breaks with c5, which he does right away. Plays c5, knight f3, knight c6. Black is applying as much pressure to the d4 square as possible. Bishop e3, and then queen to a5. So this is a very odd move from Wesley So's opponent. In this position, usually you see bishop e7, queen to b6, taking on d4, a lot of different other moves. A6 is very common. The move queen a5, pinning the knight on c3, though, is unusual, and it does lead to some unusual positions. A3 is played by Wesley So, and this is our second principle, and that is every move you make as a chess player, if possible, should come with a threat. If you look at games between 2 grandmasters, move after move, there's always a nasty threat. And the move a3 seems safe enough, but in fact has a very nasty threat. Wesley So is threatening to take on c5, and then after bishop takes b4, forking the queen and the bishop and winning material. So a3 has a threat connected to it. So black goes ahead and plays c4. Now that relaxes the tension on the center, on the d4 square, but it looks like has a plan to gain space on the queen side with b5 and b4. Bishop e2, knight to b6. Black wants to play knight to a4 and pile on that c3 knight, which is pinned by the queen. So Wesley So steps out of that pin, then bishop to d7, and that's actually the novelty. But in locked positions, novelties are often not important because you can play moves in any order. Queen to d2, Wesley So completes his development. Bishop to e7. And now the natural move here for white is to go ahead and play f5. This is a strong move. Even after ef5, white would eventually be able to win the d5 pawn through tactics. But Wesley So plays something even more interesting. He plays the move b4. Again, we talked about always having a threat. Well, obviously, b4 threatens the queen, and if the queen were to move to the only available square, b5 would win by forking the queen and the knight. What that means is that black has to take that b4 pawn en passant with the pawn at c4, so cb3. Now, after retaking with the pawn, white again is threatening b4 with all the same threats, and black would have to sacrifice a piece to survive. So what Wesley So's opponent does is he goes ahead and takes on a3. And the problem, of course, is he's setting up this pin along the a file. So what Wesley So does is he plays the rook to a2. The idea is to take the rook at f1 to a1 and shift it over and win the pinned bishop on a3. Black cannot play knight to b4 here, which looks like a strong move. The problem is if he does that, Wesley So would play knight to b1, which would be completely crushing. Double attack on the bishop at a3, and the knight can't take the rook because it's pinned. Black would lose the queen if the knight at b4 were to move. So rook to a2, and here black instead plays rook to c8. Rook f to a1, piling up on the bishop at a3, and now bishop to b4. Now it looks like black is just in big trouble because of the threats to the queen, but things are not so simple. Wesley So first plays rook to c1 to defend the knight at c3. But after a couple of moves, say bishop goes back to a3, rook comes back to a1, they just repeat the same position. And after bishop to b4, Wesley So takes the queen at a5, transposing back. Now knight takes a5 is played, and black is threatening knight takes b3, and also threatening the knight on c3. I know there's a lot of lines there, but there's a pin on this knight, basically, and a threat of knight takes b3 on this pawn. And it is not easy for Wesley So to deal with. So what he decides to do is to go ahead and give up the exchange. Take that knight with his rook. Now bishop takes a5. The trouble is, this knight is still hanging, and it's still pinned. So black is regaining a lot of material in exchange for the queen. So Wesley So gives up the knight. Queen takes a2, bishop takes c3, queen takes a7. And what we have here, basically, all the material is the same with one exception. Wesley So has a queen, and black has the two rooks. Now, that's principle number 3. You have to know how to play with a queen against the two rooks. And here is how that breaks down usually. In the middle game, the queen is stronger because there are more pieces and pawns on the board. It's harder to activate the rooks. In an endgame, the rooks tend to be stronger because there are more open lines for them to travel up and down the board on. However, there's something more important, something more concrete. And in this case, you can see the rooks are not very well developed yet, whereas the queen is very active. So in this type of position, the queen is stronger than the rooks, not only because it's the middle game, but because the queen is just more active than black's rook. So that's an important thing to know when you're playing chess. Knight goes to a8, queen takes b7, now king to e7. Now this is a very important principle. We call it prophylaxis. This is principle number 4. Basically, we want to stop our opponent from achieving their own agenda. So in this position, you see the rooks are in contact with each other. What Wesley So wants to do is make it so this king is forced back and interferes with these rooks so they can't work together. So that's what the fight is about. Wesley So wants this queen to get in on these dark squares before these rooks can become active. So there's a battle of wills there. f5 is played by Wesley So. Rook to c7 to kick that queen off. If he takes here, then just bishop to g5 check. If black plays the king to e6, then bishop to b5 is very, very strong, because if black takes it, queen to e7 would be checkmate. So in response to f5, rook to c7 was played. Wesley So played queen to a6. And again, he's threatening to play queen to a3 check. He wants to push that king back so that the rook at h8 is locked in and can't become active. So black plays bishop to b4 in order to control that diagonal, to keep that check from happening. Now, if he tries to go ahead and just double the rooks now, then queen to d6 check is all kinds of trouble for black when the king moves f6 with a threat of mate on e7, also threatening to take on g7 and promote. The bishop moves, then just bishop to h6 with the threat of queen to f8. Position just falls apart. So bishop to b4 is played. f6 check. Pawn takes, ef6, king f6, bishop to f4. Threatening the rook on c7, but also threatening bishop to e5 check, which would cost him the rook at h8. So rook h to c8, black has to give up and exchange. Bishop takes rook, knight takes rook, queen to d3. Wesley So aims at the h7 pawn. Bishop to b5, skewering the queen and the bishop. The queen moves to e3. Now the queen could play to h7. That also is a strong idea after bishop e2, knight to e5, threatening queen to f7. Rook to f8 to defend, knight to d7 check forks the king and the rook. You take, then a 2-move check wins material, queen h8, king e5, king e7, queen e5, double attacking the knight at c7 and the bishop on e2. But queen e3 comes with a nasty threat, and it turns out the player of the black pieces missed that threat in this game and instead played bishop to e2. Can you see the right move for white in this position? That's right, Wesley So played queen to g5, check, mate. 4 principles that will make you a much stronger player. Know how to play with the queens versus the rooks. Prophylaxis is definitely something you want to be able to anticipate your opponent's threats. Always make a threat when you make your move, and if your opponent gives you something, take it. See you again soon at Chess Dog. Goodbye.